Dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You're watching OBN for North Africa. This is Talk to OBN Share. Today we're going to discuss about HR 6600 draft bill of the U.S. Congress. And I joined by Deacon Yosef Tafri from Colorado. Actually, Deacon Yosef Tafri is chairman of Ethiopian American Civic Council. Thank you for joining me, Deacon.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
All right. What's your reflection about this draft bill, HR 6600?
Well, it's one of the most severe resolution that, in my involvement in dealing with campaigning for similar resolutions in the past, or campaigning against other resolution, I consider this to be one of the most damaging piece of document that ever been drafted by Congress to an African state. It just happens to be against our country. So it's a very draconian. The penalty for essentially that, first and foremost, this is a document that basically seeks the State Department to categorize Ethiopia as a state that either have committed genocide or have committed the crime against humanity regarding to the conflict in the northern Ethiopia. Having said that, it is very, very comprehensive. It touches virtually on almost all lives, both in Ethiopia and in the diaspora. And we feel it is unjust, and it does not contain some of the works that have been done inside Ethiopia, in particular some of the recent action by the Ethiopian government to address this concerns that they have. So the fact that it is misses the reality on the ground, and on top of that, that it seeks to literally force Ethiopia to surrender its sovereignty by essentially demanding quote unquote impartial investigators to come to Ethiopia and have an unfettered access to conduct their investigation. So in all senses, it's a very draconian, very unnecessary, and most of it, even though it's a congressional bill, the administration and the State Department have already given an indication that this is not something they would like to see happen. So it's a divided government piece of document that is about to go on the floor of full house for a vote.
The UN Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission jointly conducted a research, and they revealed that the Ethiopian government didn't conduct crime against humanity. Draft bill is saying that the Ethiopian government has conducted crime against humanity. How do you see this paradox?
Yes, it is, and that's one of the things that obviously that we have indicated to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who has essentially the ultimate power whether to allow this bill for consideration on the floor. Is that we have indicated exactly the things that you had just mentioned. On this effort of investigating human rights violation, and particularly whether in fact Ethiopia has committed anything that they have alleging, the United Nations Human Rights Council, together with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, have put out their conclusion, at least from the investigation they have done, that no such act has not been committed by Ethiopia. Soon after, before even the ink dried of that report, they summoned another round of resolution in Geneva to appoint so-called impartial investigators to enter Ethiopia. And the last week, um, they have named three countries to have that role to be allowed to come to Ethiopia, and namely Kenya, Gambia, and the United States itself. Unfortunately, the two individuals from both Kenya and Gambia, we've done a lot of research about them, are highly compromised individuals that pretty much carry the water for the United States. So essentially, it's a U.S. team. The very country that is alleging that such a violation has taken place, that essentially wants to come in, quote unquote, to conduct impartial investigation. Um, I hope that the Ethiopian government seriously consider whether they should allow such a team. Instead of outright rejecting any of this kind of call, I think the prime minister was very wise during the struggle that we all were involved in regarding GERD a year and a half ago. Uh, African challenge to be dealt by African solution. I think the prime minister invited the African Human Rights Commission to do a joint investigation with the Ethiopian Human Rights Council. I think this is probably a very good time maybe to reconsider that in lieu of so-called impartial investigators named by the Human Rights Council, which essentially is a team of United States investigators. And
Okay.
usually in the case of that, the outcome is almost certain because first they accuse you, then they make their own investigation to prove the allegation they have made. So in either case, I think this is something problematic for Ethiopia to consider.
You're chairman of Ethiopian American Civic Council, and a lot is expected from your council as well. And what are you doing to avert this very threatening move of the U.S.?
Well, this is a very serious piece of legislation that could put Ethiopia's security and economic at peril. And therefore, it's not something that a single action that we consider to use as a mechanism to mitigate against this piece of legislation. Instead, we feel that we need to bring out all-out effort that involves the diaspora, involves lobbying Congress, targeting particularly the individual I mentioned to you, Speaker Nancy Pelosi herself, because she has the ultimate decision whether to allow this piece of legislation to go before the House. Um, we also are making an effort, already met with Senator Schumer, who is the leader of the Senate chamber. In case that this thing passes the House, then it's going to go to the Senate, and we feel that we need to prepare the Senate leader that why we object for this bill to be considered at this time. Ato Adisu, one thing that we need to be clear, the demand, some of the provisions that are contained in this piece of legislation, the Ethiopian government has fulfilled most of it. It asks for Ethiopian military not to conduct any kind of offensive measure inside Tigray. Well, we know what happened about a month ago, that the Ethiopian military activity has essentially stopped on the border of Tigray. And so all it has is a defensive posture at this time, even in the face of some attacks that the TPLF is still conducting, particularly in the Afar region. It asks for an all-inclusive dialogue and reconciliation among opposing parties, Well, for the first time in the history of Ethiopian political landscape, the Ethiopian parliament, in fact, has commissioned the peace and I forgot how they named it, but the Dialogue National Reconciliation Commission for the first time. So that has been addressed. Um, it demands that the Ethiopian government allows humanitarian aid to reach Tigray. It has, in fact, not only that Ethiopia has complied to that, and it has never refused to do that throughout even the time when TPLF was doing aggressive action against Afar and Amhara. But more importantly, a recent statement by the United Nations Food Program Director, the fact TPLF has been the one that has been hindering the actual access for the humanitarian aid to go to Tigray is a good evidence of that. And more importantly, when in fact congressional hearing that took place back in November, similar legislation was being attempted to secretly tucked into unrelated bill called HR 4350. In that hearing, the Assistant Secretary of African Affairs, Mary Catherine Fee, was asked if in fact categorizing Ethiopia as a state that committed genocide or crime against humanity and all that stuff, she outright rejected that. So I think this is something that is very, very important. Why that matters is this: she is the one who holds the position within the State Department that deals with anything that happens to Africa. And she did not agree with any intent by Congress to actually categorically put Ethiopia in that picture. So when you look at this, in fact, this is important that I mention, when she was asked what she feels about such category, she said she does not believe this is going to be a helpful thing for the United States. And more importantly, she affirmed again that a diplomatic effort between Ethiopia and the United States based on constructive engagement is probably a better way to achieve the goal that the United States have in mind. And finally, we want also to make sure that our constituents call the Speaker Pelosi's office to express their opposition to the bill. We have also, the Civic Council has put a good petition along with another group called Get Facts that has garnered thousands and thousands of signatures that is going to be put to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We also employ a good mechanism to conduct what is happening in Ethiopia and actually to tell the truth to the world. And so we employ a newswire service that reaches globally over 100 million audience on a regular basis to make the world understand that HR 6600, what the provision that is contained, truly does not, first of all, express truly the problems on the ground in Ethiopia, nor does it contain some of the effort that was done by the government at this point. And finally, all members of Congress and the senators are getting a weekly update why they should oppose HR 6600. There are a number of congressional members that are coming forward expressing their opposition to this legislative measure. So that's what we are been actively engaged in doing at this time.
Okay, the name of Nancy Pelosi is highly associated with HR 6600. And I spoke to various political commentators so far, and they highly criticize Nancy Pelosi for doing this. Why she became rigid and having this thought while the Ethiopian government is undertaking so many measures to bring the I mean, to bring different contesting political parties and other stakeholders to have a national dialogue and conducted a ceasefire, opened humanitarian corridors, which have been asked by the U.S. so far.
To really understand the motives behind this, I think we need to go back to the genesis and how this came about. And who are behind this legislative measure. There's no doubt that TPLF supporters and lobbyists, together with Egypt, are behind this HR 6600. This piece of legislation was originally drafted actually in the Senate, not in the House. And that measure is called S 3199. Was authored by none other, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. His name is Senator Bob Mendez. This was drafted back in October, mid-October or so, as just a precaution, because at that time, they all believed that TPLF was going to march into Addis Ababa. And they were telling diplomats and U.S. citizens to evacuate Ethiopia, because they were, in fact, we met with some members of some of the high officials in the State Department. They were pretty certain that that was what's going to happen. But really what has evolved is, of course, that did not take place. So if one considers that plan as a plan A, and if that does not work, then a plan B needs to be kicked in. This is their plan B, to literally force Ethiopia into a forced negotiation with TPLF. Now keep that in mind. There is no any other method that a U.S. Foreign policy that threatens a complete sanction on Ethiopia can make a case without them saying that there is a human right violation that has taken place. Again, the report that came out of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Amnesty International, even the fairly independent civic organization like Ethiopian Human Rights Council, which is actually has gotten a good report card from the U.S. Policymakers as being a credible institution. All of that proves their allegation. Now, I want you to know something that is really crucial to this. Typically, such a legislation usually is put together by member of Congress, ordinary rank and file members. Not this time. Whether it's in the Senate, whether it is in the House, this piece of legislation was authored by the committee chairmen on both chambers. That means when you have committee chairmen who basically essentially own a piece of legislation, they have a lot of leverage to push this to come to fruition. In the case of HR 6600, the gentleman that basically introduced it is Congressman Gregory Meeks, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Typically, anything that has to do with Ethiopia or any other African countries, that the Foreign Affairs Committee has a subcommittee run by Congresswoman Karen Bass. She's the one who's responsible to bring any resolution pertaining to anybody who's in from whether it's Ethiopia or any other country. Not this time. In fact, HR 445, that was authored by none other than the Congresswoman Karen Bass, has already cleared the subcommittee, cleared the full committee of the Foreign Affairs, and already has been queued to wait in line to have its days on the floor 2 months ago, 3 months ago, for that matter. But when the House chairman decided to bring HR 6600, he basically pushed aside her resolution that have gone through the process of hearing, testimony, expert testifying, and constituent inputs. All of it has gone into the deliberation of introducing and passing a typical resolution like this. But not this time, because it was done by the chairman, who has all the power within the committee. He broke all the process and the rules, and forcefully, without having to go back to the subcommittee to do all that process, he basically introduced it on February 4. 4 days later, it already cleared the committee to go to the full House. That means the Speaker of the chamber has a lot of pressure put on by her own committee chairperson, who has a lot of political capital to really to make this thing come to fruition. And that's why we're focused on Speaker Nancy Pelosi to literally say, do we really need to pass this resolution? And one good thing that I want to mention to you, and this is just came out of nowhere, obviously, is the crisis that has taken place between Russia and Ukraine. And guess who among the congressional leaders who are responsible to come up with legislation to put sanction against Russia? Well, it's the same guy that wrote HR 6600. So he is busy right now to deal with the situation in Ukraine, and as a result, it has really sucked up all the oxygen in Congress and kind of delayed the momentum that this legislation has brought in order for it to go. From what we've heard, so I think this is something to be a little bit alarmed by. There are close to over 300 different bills or resolution waiting in line to get a chance to be heard on the floor. Well, HR 6600, because it is authored by the chairman and pushed by him, even though it only has 5 co-sponsors on the document, we heard that in 3 weeks after it passed his committee, that it shoot up and jump to number 8 in the scheduling doc. So you can see the momentum and the push that they're doing to do this. Now, as you have alluded, this is a very, very extremely damaging piece of legislation. It will, okay, so maybe we'll discuss a little bit more about what it is inside and that we need to be aware and be,
Yeah,
I guess.
okay. This HR 6600 bill is very harsh if it's going to be imposed on Ethiopia, and it's a very threatening bill if it's going to impose on Ethiopia. What I'm going to ask you is, it goes to the extent of not allowing Ethiopia to withhold money from IMF and World Bank. How do you see this?
Yeah, typically any sanction measures that is taken, it always involves World Bank and IMF, but they've gone even further than that. They're saying they named 12 other international financial institutions to make a complete um, sanction on Ethiopia financially. That means this will literally cut off financially Ethiopia from international financial grid. And they have done this to many countries that they went after that has really crippled their economy. Venezuela is one. Iran is another one. Um, North Korea. I mean, literally, these sanction measures are so complete and so damaging. Usually, the United States use them as a last resort on any given country. We have never seen where in one moment you have the president of the United States calling the prime minister of Ethiopia on the phone and to talk about mutual interest, their strategic alliance and working together and constructively and whatnot. Only a month later, such a draconian bill that literally wages war against Ethiopia. I mean, one wonders who benefits from that. Well, clearly, as I indicated to you earlier, only Egypt and TPLF are the beneficiary of this measure if it comes to pass. Therefore, financially, if this happens, it's not just World Bank and IMF. It is 12 other international financial institutions that would literally, put a iron curtain against on Ethiopia when it comes to any kind of a financial being on the grid on worldwide. On top of that, it blocks any kind of private investment by any entity, whether it is Ethiopian diaspora wanting to invest directly in Ethiopia or any other, even a private institution. It blocks Ethiopia from to have any kind of technology transfer to help its economy. It clamps down even the USAID of any kind of even humanitarian assistance to Ethiopia. So this is a complete sanction. And finally, they're coming also after the diaspora Ethiopians because they're basically this piece of legislation puts into account visa requirements for anyone who spoke on interest on behalf of Ethiopia's interest if they file a petition for a visa to enter the United States, that activity of their advocacy for Ethiopia now is going to be part of the consideration whether to grant them visa to enter the United States. Travel issues, many transfers, even for the Ethiopian diasporas, anything we can say, even on the social media or anywhere, defending and protecting the interest of Ethiopia. It's up to essentially the State Department whether some of the languages that are used to do this will be categorized as a hate speech for them to even deny for our ability to stay in the United States. So I just want to kind of give you the roundabout of what is involved in this. It is in a complete sanctional measure, which, my friend, we will do everything we can as a diaspora Ethiopians. We've done it before. We'll continue to do this, but this is not something, and I just want to make this clear, that we can do this by ourselves.
You've said similar sanction had been imposed on Iran, Venezuela, and others. Mm-hmm. And when we just see Iran is one of the fastest growing economy in the world, right? So Is there a way out in which if they going to impose on Ethiopia, but Ethiopia resist and got its own resilient economy?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, even now, we're going through a limited sanction even as as we speak. May not be on a legislative way put on a piece of document to show, but um, essentially, Western Europe and the United States have cut back, and really, we've seen signs of it, particularly in 2021. The Even though they don't necessarily call it a sanction, we've seen the effect of what it did, and by curbing direct investments, budgetary assistance, um, loans, getting reprieve for COVID, or even a consideration to change the terms of long-term debts that the country has. All of these things have impacted it, but yet, at least the Ethiopian economy has shown some resilience in mitigating this. But the HR 6600 will take this to a level that none of us would like to see happen, because this is in a complete, almost to category of waging an embargo on Ethiopia. Okay, when you coordinate 12 financial institutions to literally block Ethiopia from the financial grid, that is something that is very worrisome. And so what I really wanted to point out at this is that we will do everything we can on our capacity to mitigate this. We use all the tools, we have hired lobbying firms, we have a PR firm, we campaign, we do petitions, we use wire service, all of this.
Deacon Yosef Tafri, Chairperson of Ethiopian American Civic Council, thank you for your time, and thank you for your profound analysis and commentaries on HR 6600.
Thank you for inviting me to Adisu. May God protect Ethiopia, and may God save Ethiopia. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.